Tonight, I am going to be talking about what we can do for others after they die. And I'm going to start by going over a couple of pages of Life in Relation to Death by Chagdatoku Rinpoche. And this is an afterword that was written by his wife. He was not a monk. He's an Nyingma, but he is talking now about how you would handle the body after they have died. And I am going over this just to give you an idea of what they did over in Tibet. Much of this is not possible in this country, but I think it makes an interesting comparison. First of all, you would tap the crown of the head up here to direct their consciousness towards the top of the head. And they would have a lama come in and do a poa. It's easier to get, back then, it would be easier to get a lama to do a poa in Old Tibet than it would be here in wherever you live. After the poa was done, then they would wrap the body up and leave it undisturbed for 3 days. And then for 49 days after the death, there would be prayers and ceremonies performed, and they would invite a lama and entourage of monks to and do these. And they would, of course, make offerings to the monks of meals, and then they would make other offerings to them and so forth. And so this would add up to quite a bit of expense. And they would request prayers be made at various monasteries in the area. Then after 49 days, there would be an elaborate soak or feast ceremony. And there would be a piece of paper that would have the person who has died, has their name on it, and they would burn it. And the Lama then would determine, based on that, where the deceased will be reborn. And if there were inauspicious signs, then there would be more prayers, more ceremonies, and more mantra repetitions and so forth. So now this is interesting because I'm going to be talking about Durs, D-U-R-S, later on tonight. But if it was an inauspicious death, like for a person that was under 18 or other things, then they would do more prayers. Then after 7 weeks of continuous prayers, members of the family would discover, this is a direct quote, usually discover that grief over their loss had been transformed into confidence that their loved one had received excellent guidance through the turbulence of the after-death intermediate state, end quote. So they would continue to make offerings in the name of that person, but they would have this confidence instead of the grief that is so common. As I said, it would be transformed into this confidence that they had done. There was the best outcome possible for that. So that is the end of that section. Now I'm going to start on page 142 in Holecek book, Preparing to Die. Now, after the person has died, there would be things that would be done that are connected to the time of death. So for the first 4 weeks, every seventh day, they would do prayers. And then after 7 weeks or 49 days, that would be considered the maximum time that a person would be in the bardo, and more prayers done then. And then every year, it would be a good time to do prayers for that person. Now, Holecek makes a very specific distinction here on where 7 days lies. So if they die on a Saturday, could be any day of the week, before noon, it's actually going to be considered they died on Friday. And so then the next Friday would be the first week, the next Friday, the second week, and so forth. If they die afternoon, then the prayers would begin on Saturday in 7 days, every Saturday. And the reason why they do these every 7 days is, here is a quote from Kalu Rinpoche. At the end of each week, there is the trauma of realizing that we are dead and our minds plunge into another state of unconsciousness, like the one immediately after death, but not quite as intense, end quote. So this is why it is done every 7 days. Now, for us, if someone that you care about dies, you could be doing prayers every 7th day and dedicating them to the deceased person. Now, there can be a connection to the place of death. He says, especially if it was traumatic, so that it would be do a practice there at the place of death, if that's possible. Now, my experience has been that most people die in the hospital. And I can't imagine a hospital saying, well, every 7th day you can go into this room and say prayers. That ain't going to happen. But you might say you could be a little inventive. I'm just going off the top of my head. This might be a good point of discussion at the end of the teaching today. But it would be, well, could you be in the parking lot in a car? Could you be in some kind of semi-public area in the hospital? Or is there a park by the hospital? I remember I was in one hospital. It's actually my favorite hospital, but I do like to stay out of hospitals. The hospital name is Woodwinds, and they had natural areas that every room in the hospital that was for a patient looked out on green space. And they had paths and benches and so forth. In that case, you could do something there, I'm sure, with no problem with the hospital administration. So it is best to have heartfelt compassion for the person that you are doing the prayers for, and that it's never too late, even after 49 days. You can say prayers for a person that's been dead for 100 years, because these still can benefit that person. And if you have a very strong karmic connection with the person, your prayers can be especially powerful for the deceased. Now, if you are with the person as they are dying or soon after that, don't touch the lower part of the body and wait until consciousness leaves the body. You don't want consciousness to leave through one of the lower, what they call the lower gates. And ideally, you would want it to go through the top of the head. That's why you would touch the top of the head. And so you want to direct the person's consciousness to the top of their head. And organ harvesting has to be done, of course, immediately. So the idea of after 3 days, you can feel that the person has died and they're not doing their tukdam. If the body gets cold at the heart center, rigor mortis sets in, and so forth. Right? There are definite signs that the consciousness has left the body. Now, this recommendations don't disturb the dead person's possessions, that can upset them. Treat the body with respect, bathe the body, bless it, take care of it until you feel comfortable that the consciousness has left the body. So now the following is going to be what can be done in terms of rituals and meditation and so forth. Some of these rituals that are mentioned, I am not familiar with. They come from different lineages here, Karmakagya lineage. But these rituals are to benefit the person that has died and also to benefit those that are still alive. As I said, if we can feel that we have done what we can to help that person through the bardo, we can feel good about that. I think this is a direct quote: surrender to this wisdom and trust in its methods. And now the next section is about the power of merit. And first thing, gather and dedicate merit. Do things that create merit and then dedicate it to the deceased. And merit is very, very beneficial for the dead. And of course, we can benefit from this ourselves. So we can generate merit dedicated to deceased, and yet we will still benefit from this gathering of the merit. The power of merit is fathomless, is another quote in that book. Then he quotes Nagarj, quote, by generating the thought of enlightenment for the benefit of all beings, a mass of merit is collected. If this merit took form, it would more than fill the expanse of space. So merit is very, very important here. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche talked a lot about dedicating merit and how important it is. If it's undedicated, it's very easy for it to be destroyed by a moment of anger. So really, anytime you do anything that is virtuous, right there on the spot, it would be good to just dedicate this merit to, and it could be the deceased, the all sentient beings, whoever you feel like dedicating merit to at that time. So merit can be gathered by any of the four immeasurables: immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. And also there are the 6 paramitas. The first 5 generate merit: generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and meditative concentration. All of those, when you're practicing any of those, you are accumulating a lot of merit, and it can be dedicated to deceased. So dedicating it properly means doing it with conviction and a loving motivation. If you really mean it, it has tremendous value to the person you're dedicating it to. So you can perform virtuous actions with that person in mind right from the beginning of the start of the action. You can do it, dedicate it when it's done. And there is this simple dedication of merit that we do here. This is the English translation. By this merit may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Now, this is an interesting point that is brought up. The person that is dying or has died, they also gather merit because they are the cause of others generating merit. So if you feel inspired to do something for that person that has died, they gather merit too because they inspired you to do this. Here is a personal example from myself, and it is that my best friend was killed in an accident, killed instantly, and it was a result of that. About a year and 5 months later, I met a Buddhist teacher and started practicing Buddhism. So he gathers merit, and whenever I do anything beneficial, and this was back in 1985 when he was killed. That was a long time ago. So I'm just going to go over a few things here about the paramitas. Dharma is the highest form of generosity, giving the gift of Dharma. And so if you can just in some little way pass a little bit of Dharma on to another person, and this is being gentle, this is not about, oh, have you heard the good news, brother, and being a born again and Buddhist. This is my experience. If you're asked a question, of course, I wear my robes out in public and people do ask me questions, but I'll give a simple answer. And if that is insufficient, they will ask for more. So it's not about just trying to give them everything you can in one sentence, but just little bits. We can dedicate our spiritual practice. We can sponsor translation projects, send money to Dharma centers, sponsor someone in retreat. All of these are gathering merit. You can donate to the construction of a spiritual project like a stupa, monastery, shedra, which is a monastic college. For Vajrayana practitioners, you could sponsor a soak or part of a soak. A lot of times when they do them at KTD, there are a number of different things that you can do to sponsor it, because sponsoring the whole thing would be fairly expensive, but you could like sponsor one meal or sponsor a tea service. When you have these long practices, in the morning, there will be a tea service between breakfast and lunch, and in the afternoon, there'll be a tea service. And there's usually some kind of a, let's say a cookie, a biscuit, or something like that that goes with the tea service. Now, he mentions saving lives, and he says this is especially helpful. And what this means is rescuing animals that would otherwise die. Now, in Tibet, you would like buy a yak, and then they would be painted and a mark painted on them. And the idea was that everybody knew you cannot kill this animal, and he could roam about in the wilderness of Tibet and die a natural death. Now, we can't do that in this country. And so at one time we tried here to things like buying mice that would be at a store that would be bought to feed to like a pet snake, or we have done worms. Now, the problem with worms is the worms you buy in the bait shop are not native, they're invasive. You don't want to do that. You don't want to release worms. Quite honestly, I think the easiest way of this to save a life is when you buy a or get an animal from a local animal shelter. But then you have a commitment. Dogs can live a long time, but I have not done a life release here at Hay River KTC in a very long time because I just couldn't figure out a way to do this in an environmentally sound way. Now, butter lamps can be offered, and KTD, it's very easy to offer a butter lamp. You can just go onto their website, and again, you can write what you want to on the card that will be placed on the butter lamp. You can give the possessions of the dead person to the Goodwill or another nonprofit that would distribute them. Again, wait a few days before you do this because you don't want to disturb the person that has died. Their consciousness can, you might say, hang around, and they might get upset if all their quote unquote valuable possessions, end quote, are given to the Goodwill because, quite honestly, their valuable possessions aren't that valuable. If there is a use for them, I know people will even put a notice in the paper and then all these unwanted goods are going to be out on the curb. Come and take your pick, and then put these possessions out on the curb. Even that could be done. Just so many ways to do this. By giving them away, you're generating merit. And you could contribute to various projects like hospice, to orphanages, hospitals. I get a huge amount of requests from all kinds of different organizations. I'm sure it's no different for you, whether it be care or on and on and on. There is no lack of organizations that would gladly accept a donation of clothing. If you wanted to, it could be food. But now, after performing any of these meritorious deeds, you have to dedicate the merit properly. And this can multiply tremendously the amount of merit that you're collecting. So dedicating merit multiplies their power. He used the word exponentially. The greater the scope of the dedication, the greater the power. Here are some points about dedicating merit. Dedicate the merit not just to the deceased, but to all beings, that this may cause happiness and lead them to enlightenment. And then have aspirations that all beings may experience happiness and be reborn in a pure land. Amitabha's land of Dewa Chen is the easiest to be reborn in, so it would be excellent to just dedicate it to their rebirth in Dewa Chen. Now, when we give away the merit, when we dedicate the merit, it's important to understand that this is not what modern thinkers would call a zero-sum game, whereas you've got so much and if you give that much away, you have that much less left. It doesn't work like that. That merit grows by dedicating it to all beings. You are, by giving it away, you're creating more merit. Here is a quote: if you dedicate the merit to all sentient beings, the merit becomes inexhaustible. And this was a quote by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. Again, the reason why we dedicate merit is that undedicated merit can be eliminated very quickly by a moment of anger. So the advice is to dedicate the merit immediately when you finish. He used a modern example of this, that dedicating the merit is like pushing the save button on your computer. Finally, here is a quote from the book: merit can be understood as spiritual power that manifests in day-to-day experience. Other ways of generating merit is to recite mantras and then, of course, dedicate the recitation. So the only limit is your own, you might say, imagination. The most powerful dedication prayer, and it's actually an aspiration prayer, is the king of aspiration prayers. When I would lead Nyungne here, we would always do that prayer. And you could get from the KTD bookstore a number of different dedication prayers and aspiration prayers if you want to. So it's important to have these aspiration prayers and then dedicate the merit. And the aspiration is, of course, to accomplish a certain goal. So the wishes that you make at the time of death will have a great impact on your rebirth. He put this in there, even though we're talking about what you can do for others. But this is important, that these dedication and aspiration prayers are very, very powerful. And he says, if you can't connect with the following rituals that are in the book that I'm going to go through now, relying on the power of merit will suffice. So these rituals that I'm going to go through here, he said that choose the one that you are connected with the most, or the person that has, the deceased has connected with the most. And what is most important and most beneficial is your heart connection, your belief that these prayers actually work, as opposed to, well, maybe this will help, maybe not. I'm not sure, but there are stories, Tibetan stories, about the power of confidence and belief. So I'm going to repeat one. This is about, of course, this is back in, you might say, classical Tibetan history before the Chinese invasion. There was a man that was a merchant, and he would go to Nepal and even as far south as India, gathering things to bring back to Tibet and then sell. And his wife asked him to bring back a relic of the Buddha. And he made a number of trips, and each time when he came back, no relic. He didn't even look for one. And finally she said, ready to start another trip, if you don't bring back a relic, I am going to kill myself. And of course, after spending months and months in India and months traveling there and months traveling back, he gets to Tibet and suddenly realizes, I did not bring back any relic. So as he traveled closer to home, he found the skeleton of a dead dog on the side of this path that he was taking. So he took a tooth from the dog, brought it back to his wife and said, "This is a tooth of the Buddha." And of course, she was just overjoyed. And she placed this tooth on her shrine, prayed to it every day, made aspirations, and so forth. Well, one day when she went in to pray, there was a little, they're called ring cell. They're small, round, pearl-like objects. Her prayers were such and her confidence was such that this tooth created a ring cell, which is a sign of being a very powerful relic. And of course, then she started telling other people. And then, of course, a local monk had to come and look at it. And he said, "This is just a dog's tooth." And it was true. But the point is that the woman's dedication, confidence, her faith produced results. So it's very good to feel confident about the prayers that you are doing, whether it be for someone that is deceased, for anybody living, and of course for yourself too, that if you have a doubt about the effectiveness of your practice, it's not going to be very effective. But if you have confidence, it will be. So motivation is extremely important. So to go on here, so the first ritual that he mentions here, that with that introduction of mine, reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, read it aloud for the dead person. This gives them guidance, and this will generate a lot of merit and blessings. And the words have power. They're in Tibetan, but they have power because they're the words of Padmasambhava. And this reminded me of more than one conversation that some of us 3-year retreatants had with Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, and it was, why chant in Tibetan if you don't understand all the words? And Rinpoche said, the words have been written by great masters of the past, and the words themselves have great power. So reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, even if the person has no knowledge of Tibetan, it still is very powerful to do this. Another reason for reading this is that this will stabilize the mind of the reader. Steady mind will attract the person that has died, their consciousness, because they're looking for stability. Everything has changed. They're in an environment that is totally unfamiliar. But if you can be reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead and keep a stable mind, this will be very, very, very beneficial. That said that the deceased will take refuge in that stability. Now, there has been a Bardo packet put together by some of Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's students under his direction, and there are audio recordings of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as well as some of the aspiration prayers that I referred to earlier. And here in the book, Andrew Holecek says, start reading the book when the dying person stops breathing. And then, if possible, to continually read it for 49 days. Well, now I am going to disagree with him a little bit. I would have no objection to playing the Tibetan Book of the Dead in the room when the person is still dying. I had a friend of mine that actually, at one point, I shared an office with her, and she had stomach cancer. So I brought my recording in, and this was played a lot when I wasn't even there. And I got this feedback from some of the family members is, of course, they didn't understand Tibetan, but they just found it was very soothing and comforting to have these chants played. It's not played continuously, then play or read from the Tibetan Book of the Dead on the 7th, 14th, and 21st days. So the reason for repetition is that Bardo beings, they can be guided, but they forget quickly. There's too much distraction. So it's our job to remind them, and reading this every 7 days is a good reminder for them, because the Tibetan Book of the Dead is basically giving instructions for the deceased and for the best possible outcome. And he said it takes about 3 hours to read the book. And if possible, read it where the death occurred. The Tibetan Book of the Dead liberates by being seen, heard, or read. The next is a sur offering. And these frequently are called fire pujas. The smoke is for Gandharva or scent eaters, that they, in the Bardo, you don't have a physical body, you have a mental body. You can't eat, but you can smell. It's a short puja. We do it here on New Year's Day, whether it be Western or the Tibetan New Year's. What you have is a mixture of food, various types of food is specific about what the recipe is. And then there's usually some brocade cloth that is cut up very finely, put in, incense is put in there, and usually some alcohol of some kind or another. And so then you go through, you used to have a fire that is down to coals, so you'll get a lot of smoke. Then you will do the prayers while the substance that is being offered as a burnt offering is placed on the coals. So this could be done again the 7th, 14th, and 21st days, or could be done every day for 49 days. Myself, this is a practice that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche taught in 3-year retreats. Every evening, I do a short sur offering. The next point is commissioning monasteries. So make an offering to retreat centers or monasteries for them to perform rituals for the deceased. This benefits you, and you gain merit for making the request and paying for it. And then also, if it's a monastery, the monks will gain merit. If it's a nunnery, the nuns will gain merit, as well as they receiving the offering. So the deceased will have great benefit from these kinds of rituals. Now, to go on here, what's coming next are very complex rituals, and they're really beyond the capability of most Western practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. But if you commission monks or nuns, ritual masters to do them, that's fine. You could contact a monastery over in Nepal or India, Tibet, tell them what you want, ask for advice, and make a donation. Now, this is what I have found, first of all, and that is getting money to a monastery or a nunnery it's not like you put a check in the mail. Don't do that. You will want to find someone that is going there that can hand carry the money and then give it to them directly. Because in Asia, things don't operate like they do in this country. My first trip to Asia from China to the Tibetan area of China to Nepal and also to India. And there are so many good statue makers and Thangka painters. And I spent all my money that I had reserved for Thangkas and Rupas. And I thought, oh, I want one more. And I used a credit card. And let me tell you, I didn't take long to regret that because they charged me twice. So you have to be careful over there. It's good to, you might say, pre-plan this to decide where you would like to send the money to and maybe even find a way to do it. Sending money to a retreat center like KTD in this country, no problem. Here is a quote by Andrew Holecek. On a personal note, the solace I have gained from having monasteries, my community, and my teachers doing practice for my loved ones has been immeasurable. Because I set it up in advance, it took minimal effort to start the rituals after my loved ones died. To continue here, Tibetan Buddhism can seem very exotic, maybe even superstitious. But I emphasize this, that in Tibet, the whole culture was steeped in Buddhism, and it was not exotic to them. What was exotic to them was a McDonald's. And then you have to be in the city to get a McDonald's built to begin with. So it doesn't help us to look at this as exotic, and because it's exotic, somehow very powerful and mysterious and so forth. It's not exotic in India, Nepal, and Tibet. So if we have more confidence in these practices and rituals that we can at least sponsor, that is very helpful. So strong faith and trust is very, very important. The next practice here is the iron hook of compassion. And this is, he describes it as an advanced POA practice. Again, if you are going to commission a Lama to do this, contact them in advance and discuss it with them. A highly realized master could do a POA from a great distance. It would not have to be in the same room as the person that has died. And again, it's best to do the POA as soon as possible after death. The iron hook of compassion, as I said, is a POA practice, but it's more powerful. And you might say a master, not necessarily a Rinpoche, but at least a ritual master could, you might say, use this iron hook to grab the consciousness of the deceased days after they have died, even when they are wandering around in the bardo. Here is a quote. I believe this is Andrew Holecek's quote, "The meditative power of a master can locate in the bardo beings, hook their consciousness, and send it to a pure land." So compassion is an essential ingredient of this practice, that you don't have to be highly realized to benefit another person. And again, by commissioning someone else to do it, you're creating merit for yourself, and you're doing very beneficial activities for the deceased. He also mentions that even if you are not trained to do this iron hook of compassion, any ritual that you would do, any chanting that you would do, if it's done in a group, becomes much more powerful. Having 6 people say prayers individually in their home, the power of that compared to 6 people chanting together in the same shrine room is magnified by a vast, vast amount. And when you are doing these prayers for the deceased, think of that dead person and concentrate on their suffering, so that you realize, that you understand that you're doing this to alleviate their suffering, not your grief. It's for the other person. The next is the dur, D-U-R, and this removes obstacles. He says spirits that obstruct the journey through the bardo. I'm not familiar with it, and I don't want to add much more to it than what is already in the book. So read the book, and I don't have the confidence that I could teach on something that I've never received instructions for. This, again, clears up obstacles. And once that has been done, then other practices are more effective. Then there is the Sukhavati practice, and this is leading the dead person to Amitabha's pure land of the Tibetan is Dewa Chen, the land of great bliss. To do this, of course, you would need to have an empowerment, a reading transmission, and then explanations of how to do the practice. So we're getting into more and more esoteric practices. So what I am going to say here is, you might be better to do some of the previous practices. And it's fine. It's fine. You don't have to know it all. He has so many different practices mentioned here that can be done. You only need to do one. So then there is the Nadren, and this guides the consciousness to a better rebirth. And again, there's a master, a lama that is accomplished that will be doing this. And those are not easy to find. So I'm skipping over that. Then comes the satsas. These are small little statues. They're made out of clay or plaster. And then in the clay or plaster is mixed some ashes from the deceased, perhaps a little hair, some nails. They've been blessed, and then they put in the statue. And there's a form that you can get that you would just put the clay in the form and then clamp it together, let it sit there for a while, and then take off the form, and you've got a statue. Then you can take that home, put it on your shrine, make offerings to it in order to gather merit and send merit. The next is purification of the 6 realms. This is a Nyingma practice, and it is for the dead. The idea is it cleanses the body of the 6 principal negative emotions: passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, pride, and greed. If those can be removed, that this will be very beneficial for the deceased. Now, again, you need an empowerment, a reading transmission, and instructions on how to do this. And that's very important. I have never received any of those for this practice. So again, I'm going to be brief in my discussion of it. But if you feel motivated, you can find somewhere instructions, the empowerment, and the reading transmission for this practice. Then there's the Shikro practice. Again, you need the empowerment, the reading transmission, and the instructions. The Red Tara. I've never received a Red Tara transmission or empowerment. And again, I'm not familiar with this. I know this, the Chagda Toku's, Rinpoche's, his Sangha practiced this regularly. So then the crematorium practice, and I have nothing to add to this. And then the Galupa rituals, again, I have not ever received instructions in the Galupa specifically for these practices, but some of them are similar to what we would do in the Kagyu tradition. For instance, there's the 35 Buddhas, the King of Aspiration prayers, that Medicine Buddha puja, and so forth. So to sum up all of this, you now have an idea of how much is available to help the deceased. And you do not have to be proficient in all of them. You only need to be proficient in one. And what is so important is that you have tremendous compassion for the person that has died. He has, in the end here in the summary, things to avoid, and that is avoid pressuring people to participate in the rituals. A lot of people will feel uncomfortable, at the least, if they attend a Buddhist puja. And many of them are, you might say, too numb to do anything but grieve. So don't feel that you have to be able to do the perfect ritual, to have perfect visualizations, and on and on and on. All of this just adds more stress, and it won't help the dead. So don't be too hard on yourself either. You don't have to be perfect. And looking ahead, tell your Dharma friends what you would like them to do for you when you die. And that what is most important, of course, is love and compassion. This is what you might say makes the rituals work. Then dedicate the merit. Commission monasteries or Dharma centers to practice the rituals that you want.